My name is Kennedy, 36 years old, a researcher at a medical institute in Portland. After more than a decade of grinding in the lab and chasing grants, I bought a small 2-story house perched on a quiet hill in Lake Oswego. I planted roses along the stone path, designed each room myself, and painted the kitchen in my favorite shade. My first real taste of freedom. I hadn't told anyone I was coming home early from a cancer conference in Boston. My flight was canceled, and instead of staying another night at the hotel, I booked a connecting ticket through Denver and grabbed an Uber home. It was close to 8 p.m. I figured I'd water the garden before dark and treat myself to a glass of wine. But as I approached the gate, a familiar burst of laughter echoed from the first-floor window. And I froze. My heart skipped a beat. "This house is way too big for just her," said Hannah, my younger sister, loud enough for me to hear every word. I stood still, keys clutched in hand, not yet in the lock. Through the slightly parted curtains, I could see my parents sitting at the dinner table. Hannah was beside her husband, Mark, his hand resting on her thigh like he belonged there. "She won't mind," Mark chimed in, his voice slick as cheap syrup. "Kennedy always gives in. I borrowed her car for a month without asking and she didn't say a word." "Actually," Hannah giggled, "Mark and I are thinking of moving in here for a few months, just until we get things settled with buying a house. She's busy with that science conference or whatever. She won't even notice." I stood paralyzed. They had no idea I was barely 10 feet away, outside the window, in the dark. The same yard I'd spent dozens of hours landscaping now echoed with voices planning to move in. As if my house were an abandoned Airbnb. "This house," my mom said, lifting her glass of white wine, "is perfect for a young couple starting their journey. Open kitchen, backyard, spare room for a nursery. Kennedy's always away. She'll understand." My dad nodded, his tone flat like this had been rehearsed. "Don't ask, just present it as a done deal. She always caves." "I don't remember when I dropped my keys." The metal clinked sharply on the stone, and Mark tilted his head slightly. I instinctively backed into the rosebush, heart racing, thorns tearing a small hole in my pants. I bit my lip hard enough to taste blood, just to keep from swearing out loud. "What the hell is going on?" I screamed internally. I bought this house with my own hands, every dollar earned alone. No one gave me anything. And yet here they were, discussing moving in, like I didn't even exist. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. A text lit up the screen. "Hey sis, free tonight? Come by mom and dad's for dinner, we've got good news." "Dida," from Hannah. I let out a dry laugh that scraped my throat. That's when I knew. They weren't planning to stay temporarily. They were plotting to take everything. And they were counting on me to fold, just like all the times before. I turned away, walking slowly back to the car, blood still seeping from the tear in my pants. But that pain was nothing compared to the sting of betrayal. I drove through the winding streets of East Portland, night fully fallen. The streetlights stretched ahead like a string of silent warnings. My hands still trembled slightly on the steering wheel. I couldn't remember how many turns I'd made. I just knew my destination. An old tile-roofed house, tucked deep in a nearly forgotten neighborhood. My Aunt Pearl's, my father's youngest sister. In my family, Pearl's name hadn't been spoken since I was in high school. All I knew was that she once had a fierce argument with my grandparents and parents over a property dispute, then cut ties completely. Every time I asked, my mom would just shake her head and say, "Don't be like Aunt Pearl, too proud, and nobody wants to keep you around." But right now, I needed someone who didn't want to keep me around, to keep me sane. I parked in front of her house around 9 p.m. The faded blue paint, the wide porch lined with hanging baskets, and warm yellow light spilling from the kitchen window, none of it had changed. I wasn't sure she'd even recognize me. The last time we met was 15 years ago, at a funeral, where she was pushed to the fringe like a shadow. I rang the bell, my palm was ice cold. The door opened in under 3 seconds. A woman with snow-white hair tied back, sharp eyes behind metal-framed glasses, appeared. She studied me for a moment. "Kennedy?" I swallowed hard, nodded. "I need to talk about everything." The silence stretched so long I thought she might shut the door. Then she swung it wide open. "Come in. Don't stand out there giving the neighbors something to gossip about." I stepped inside. The scent of old wood, mint, and a hint of cinnamon cookies floated through the air. I felt like I had fallen out of the false world I once called family. "Sit down." She pointed to a wooden chair by the dining table. "Hungry?" I shook my head, though my stomach churned. "I just overheard them plotting to take my house. Hannah, Mark, my parents. They're planning to move in while I'm gone." "They haven't changed," she said, pouring tea. "Still thinking they have the right to take from anyone too quiet for too long." I looked at her. "Do you believe me?" "No need to. I understand." She set a cup in front of me. "I had a house in Bend. Your dad and the others tried to sell it out from under me to split the money. I refused. They called me selfish. Then they hired a lawyer and forged my signature." I stared, stunned. "I sued, won, but the cost was being cut off by the entire family. I don't regret it." I sat in silence, breath shallow. "Now it's your turn." She sat across from me, her gaze sharp as a blade. "What do you need?" "Help me keep my house." I don't know legal strategies, but I know they're working to make this look like a done deal. I want to be ready. "Smart." She nodded. "Do you have proof?" "Not yet, but I know they're planning it behind my back. Hannah texted me about dinner like nothing's wrong." She scoffed. "They pulled that on me too. Scheming behind your back, then smiling at dinner like it's all love and unity." I gripped my teacup tightly. "I'm done being silent." "Then don't be." She stood and pulled an old metal box from a cabinet. Inside were documents, business cards, and a USB drive. "I've stayed in touch with my old attorney. Trustworthy man. There's also a property investigator. Helped me overturn a fraudulent title once." I looked at her and the fear inside me started to fade. Not because I was sure I'd win, but because I finally wasn't alone. "I have one question," I said. "Why didn't you fight louder back then? Why let them paint you as the outcast?" She shrugged. "Because I still believed they might come around. Biggest mistake of my life was waiting for people to wake up. What about you?" Without hesitation I answered, "I'm not waiting for anyone." She nodded. "Then go all the way, but remember, Kennedy, fight not to win. Fight so they can't swallow you whole." I left around 10 p.m. carrying the names of 3 people. An attorney, a private investigator, and a real estate broker who could trace quiet transactions in the neighborhood. I knew Hannah and Mark weren't targeting my house just because it was convenient. They were running from something. All I had to do was find it before they sealed the door on me again. Sunday afternoon, I arrived at my parents' house in Hillsdale, following Hannah's oh-so-casual invitation. The sky hadn't gone completely dark yet, but the shadows from the old oak trees out front cast a dull gray light over the house, the kind of light that usually accompanied uncomfortable conversations. The door opened before I could knock. "You're here!" Hannah chirped, hugging me just enough not to smudge her mascara. Behind her, Mark stood in the kitchen, holding a bottle of red wine like he owned the place. "Did she make it back from the conference on time?" my mother called out from the dining room, her voice sugary sweet in a way that made my skin crawl. "We're making your favorite roast." I took a deep breath, nodded politely, and stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of meat, wine, and something so fake it left a taste in my mouth. Dinner started the same way it always did, if you ignored the fact that 3 nights ago I caught them plotting to take my house. Dad rambled about the local baseball team, Mom bragged about some new pear preserves she'd learned to make, and Hannah launched into her plans for a yoga workshop for spiritual high-op normal women. I sat there chewing greens like it was the last thing I could still control. The real show began when Mark set his wine glass down and turned to me, his voice laced with suspicious innocence. "Hey Kennedy," he began. "Have you ever thought that maybe your house is too big for just one person? I mean, you're barely there. You're always at conferences, in the lab, at the research center." Before I could answer, Hannah jumped in. "We actually just found out some really exciting news," she said, placing her hand gently on Mark's and then on her belly. "We're thinking about starting a family. And honestly, your house would be perfect for us to begin that journey." That sentence rang out like a fire alarm across the dinner table. I put my knife down. "What exactly are you saying?" Mom was quick to respond. "Don't overreact, Hannah's just sharing an idea. That house is a little much for one person." "You've missed so many family moments," Dad added. "And Hannah's always been here, present, caring. That house would be a great start for them. You can still keep your name on the deed, it's just them moving in, living there, like it's theirs." I cut in, my voice colder than I expected. Mark chuckled, trying to keep it light. "You're misunderstanding. We just need something stable for a few years. We'd help take care of the place, pay a few small bills if needed." "A few years?" I scanned the table. Has everyone forgotten I bought that house, alone? With my money. Not a single cent from anyone here. "There you go again," Hannah sighed, slipping into her usual condescending tone. "Listing your achievements like always. But you don't even live in that house, you live in your lab. That place is just a bloated "Stop," I said, each word sharp. "That house is the one thing I built that no one could take from me. And no one is going to divvy it up behind my back." Silence swallowed the room. Mom forced a smile. "Kennedy, no one's dividing anything. We're just making a suggestion." "Suggestion?" I laughed, bitter rising in my throat. "What about the move-in plan I overheard 3 nights ago? The toasts to the new home while I was outside the window, listening to every word." Hannah paled. Mark squeezed her hand. "Were you spying on us?" she snapped. "No need to spy when your voice was loud enough to rattle the glass." I leaned forward. "You asked why I don't show up for family dinners anymore? This. Right here. This is why." Dad slammed his hand on the table. "Kennedy, that's enough. You're ruining a family meal." I stood up, pushing my chair back. "A meal where you plot to steal your eldest child's house behind her back isn't a family dinner." I turned to leave, but Mom's voice caught me. "You're ruining everything. Hannah is pregnant." I stopped, turned back. "Then that's all the more reason to make sure the home you bring a child into is built on truth, not a house of lies." I left without slamming the door. The crash inside had already been loud enough. I didn't need to raise my voice. They'd revealed everything on their own. I didn't go straight home after that chaotic dinner. My heart was still pounding like it might tear out of my chest, so I turned directly to Aunt Pearl's. Her kitchen lights were still on, bright against the quiet of the night, and her old radio hummed with an evening financial news broadcast in the background. She looked at me without asking a thing, just poured a cup of hot tea and set it down on the old wooden table, already covered with folders and documents. "You came at the right time," she said, cutting straight to the point. "I asked an old friend to look into Mark's financials." I snapped my head up. "You mean a private investigation?" "Exactly, and you should brace yourself." She slid a thick stack of documents toward me. The first page was a summary of mortgage loans. My vision blurred as I saw my parents' address. Wait, did they mortgage the house? I flipped to the next page. $650,000? 8 months ago, Aunt Pearl confirmed. Right after Mark launched what he called a strategic investment fund, which was really just a dressed-up Ponzi scheme. I sat there, frozen. She handed me another stack. bank statements, multiple wire transfers from my parents' account to a web of shell companies, all traced back to Mark. I remember Mark talking about long-term sustainability projects in California, I murmured. He called it a new generation capital cycle. I thought he was just showing off. Aunt Pearl didn't laugh. She pulled a USB from a drawer. This has information on 3 real estate lots on the outskirts of Gresham. The buyer is listed as Fairview Holdings, but Mark's behind it. He used your parents' money to buy foreclosed properties, flipped them under different names, and resold them for triple the price. That's illegal, I said, fists clenching. He's exploiting the family, laundering money through real estate. That's not all, she continued. One of those properties is under federal review for forged contracts. An ex-IRS investigator is currently tracking his activity. I collapsed into the chair, hands gripping the documents as my thoughts spiraled. Did Hannah know? Or was she just a blindly loyal pawn? You think Hannah's involved? I asked. She transferred funds to a personal account in Mark's name. Not much. About $20,000. But enough to implicate her if charges are filed. My fingers went numb. This wasn't just about a house anymore. They'd pushed things far beyond what I'd imagined. If this imploded, my parents would lose everything. Hannah might face prosecution. And Mark? He'd drag everyone down with him. Why didn't they say anything? I barely recognized my own voice. Why didn't my parents tell me? Why pretend everything's fine? Because they're scared, Aunt Pearl said, her tone flat. Scared of shame. Of admitting they trusted the wrong person. Of realizing they've lost control of their own family. I stared at the evidence. Every number cut deep. Every transaction felt like a betrayal. I used to think I was the disposable one. Turns out, I was the lifeboat they planned to quietly climb into. What are you going to do? She asked, watching me closely. I took a deep breath. Start with Mark. He's the root. If I can prove he's been scamming them, the rest will collapse like dominoes. I've got someone for that, she said, pulling a business card from her wallet. Natalie Hargrove, former financial crimes auditor, now private investigator. Not cheap, but worth every dollar. I took the card. Black background. Simple white text. We don't reclaim your reputation. We prove it was never lost. I smiled, cold and steady. I'll meet her tomorrow morning. Aunt Pearl nodded, poured more tea. Good. You're not fighting this alone anymore. I stayed another hour, marking every document, photographing each piece of evidence, emailing them to my encrypted archive. As I left, I paused on the front steps, watching the kitchen lights spill onto the quiet street like a beacon. In the dark, I pulled out my phone and typed a message to Hannah. Do you know what Mark's really doing? No reply, but I didn't need one anymore. Monday morning, just as I was about to leave the house to meet with investigator Natalie, there was a sharp, urgent knock at the door. I glanced at the doorbell camera. It was Hannah. No makeup, hair in a tight bun, gray hoodie, black leggings. Her face was pulled taut like a wire about to snap. I cracked the door open. Were you planning to ghost me completely? Hannah asked, skipping any pleasantries. I'm heading out, I replied curtly, keeping my hand on the door to block her from coming in. What is it? What the hell was that text last night? She shot back like a stone into still water. Mark's freaking out. Mom's been crying all morning. Are you really planning to blow everything up? I looked at my sister. Not the little girl in frilly dresses who used to follow me around the backyard. Standing in front of me was a grown woman. Or rather, a co-conspirator, desperately trying to cover up what was already unraveling. Fine, I said, opening the door fully. You want to talk? Come in. But be ready. Hannah walked in without a word. I shut the door and pointed to the dining table where folders lay open, plastered with notes and highlighted pages. She scanned the mess quickly, her eyes darting. What is all this? Evidence, I replied. Of the mortgage loan on Mom and Dad's house. the shell companies Mark's using to launder money through real estate. The transactions in Gresham. The retirement fund they funneled into a strategic investment fund that doesn't legally exist. Hannah's face drained of color. Where did you get this? Aunt Pearl helped me, and a former IRS investigator is confirming its legal weight. You can't. Can tell the truth? I cut her off. They're trying to steal my house, to cover up a financial sinkhole you call a family plan. Did you think I'd stay silent like always? She sank into a chair, hands gripping the edge of the table. You don't get it. We just needed a few months. Mark needed time to move money around. Mom said you'd understand if you knew the reason. And that reason is, what? That you all decided to cut me out? Use my house as your storm shelter? And then pretend nothing happened once the dust settles? Mark has a plan. Mark has a trail of fraud reports and a pending federal investigation, I snapped, tossing a photocopy of Natalie's report at her. Did you know he's being watched? Hannah looked down. That silence said more than any denial could. She knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to realize she was backing something rotten. I didn't have a choice, she whispered. You know how Mom is. If I didn't go along, she would have cut me off completely. I'm pregnant, Kennedy. I didn't respond right away. The only sound was the faint grind of my teeth. And so, I said quietly, voice sharp as glass, you chose to let him take us all down with you? I didn't think it would get this far. Not thinking is one thing, I said coldly, but to raise a glass in my house? Behind my back. That's no longer an accident. Anna stood, eyes glossy but her voice steady. So what now? You going to the police? Going to press charges on Mom and Dad too? Put me in jail while I'm carrying a child? I stared at her for a long moment, then turned away. I'm not putting you anywhere. You walked into this willingly. I'm just pulling the curtains open. She trembled, saying nothing. You said you needed a few months to stay over, I added, looking back. But let's be real. You might only get a few weeks. Because if this collapses, this house, and you, will fall apart before that baby even gets here. Don't. She whispered. Don't drag everyone down. I walked to the door and opened it. Get out, Hannah. And tell Mark. Time's up. She stood frozen for a few seconds, then walked out silently, not saying another word. When the door clicked shut behind her, I leaned against the wall. My hands were shaking. But my heart? It didn't hurt anymore. Wednesday afternoon, I sat in my car on NW 23rd Street, 1 block away from the Copper and Birch Cafe. Natalie had warned me. Let him feel in control. If he thinks he's leading the conversation, he'll dig his own grave. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Cream blouse, hair neatly tied back, light makeup. A discreet recording device was tucked into my left ear. I lightly touched my collar, where a second mic was clipped beneath the fabric. My phone buzzed. He's here, FBI is in position, stay calm, don't interrupt unless necessary. Text from Natalie. I walked into the cafe. The place smelled like espresso and old walnut wood. Mark, Hannah's husband, was already seated, crisp white shirt, gold watch, smiling like he owned the city. Hey Kennedy, he said, standing and shaking my hand as if this were a friendly catch-up. I appreciate you taking the time to meet. I want to understand everything, I said, taking my seat, eyes locked on his face. About this so-called family plan you all discussed behind my back. Mark chuckled. Oh, that was just a misunderstanding. You know, your house is big and things have been a little turbulent for us lately. So you want to use my home for stability? I tilted my head. And to keep funding your operations. A flicker of surprise passed across his face. You know about that? I know more than you think, I said, sitting up straight. Like how you used Fairview Holdings to purchase 3 foreclosed properties in Gresham, then funneled them through Northgate Capital, a company in your brother's name, but funded by my parents' accounts. Mark narrowed his eyes, still smiling. I didn't realize you followed finance so closely. Only when someone tries to turn my house into collateral for their pyramid scheme. He leaned back, sipped his coffee, then placed the cup down softly. You're a smart woman, Kennedy. I won't pretend. But you also know every investment carries risk. We're talking about family here. About our shared future. Family? I scoffed. The same family that toasted to their new home while I was outside the window listening? That family? Mark's gaze sharpened. The polished mask was beginning to crack. I need that house to keep everything from falling apart. Because you're under investigation? I lowered my voice. Because the IRS has flagged your transactions? Because your shell companies are red flags for money laundering? His lips tightened. What do you want? He asked, voice dropping. I want you to say it. All of it. Clearly. No games, I replied, leaning back. Because even if I wasn't listening, the FBI already is. Silence. His eyes darted, to the door, to the barista, back to me. You're recording me? He asked, voice sharp as a blade. I don't have to, I replied calmly. You're giving it all up willingly. But the good news is, I am recording. Mark clenched his fists on the table. I could see the wheels turning. After a pause, he let out a breath and relaxed his shoulders. Fine. I used your parents' money to buy low-cost homes, flip them, and pocket the margins. Problem is, one deal's paperwork is faulty. If it gets investigated, everything crumbles. I need new funds. A place to lie low for a few months. And you chose my house. I nodded. No title, no paperwork, no consent. I figured you'd understand. You're the one who always keeps the family balanced. Not anymore, I said coldly. You've reached my limit. He shot up from his chair. You have no idea what you've started. Actually, I said with a small smile. I know exactly. Right then the door opened. Two plainclothes men walked straight to our table. Mark Evans, the taller one asked, flashing a badge. FBI, you'll need to come with us. Mark turned to me, eyes filled with fury. You'll regret this, Kennedy. Your whole family won't survive what's coming. I said nothing as they cuffed him and led him away. In my earpiece, Natalie's voice came through. We've got enough, well done, next target. Hannah. I stood, left the cafe to the murmurs behind me. Outside, the pale sunlight spilled across the damp pavement. I didn't know how long this would go on. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid to see it through. 3 days after Mark's arrest, I returned to my childhood home, not out of nostalgia, but because Natalie said I needed to be there. The FBI briefing was scheduled to happen right in the living room, the same one that had hosted dozens of dinners, where I was treated like a shadow. My parents were already seated. Ronald and Sandra Moore, both in their 60s, sat across from each other like strangers. No classical music, no vanilla candles, just the musty air of a house that hadn't been truly lived in for years, and the silent tension of truth about to surface. I walked in and set my document bag on the wooden table. Natalie followed, carrying a laptop and 2 printed transcripts of verified audio evidence. What have you gotten yourself into, Kennedy? My mother asked, her voice hoarse, eyes red. You called the FBI? Why would you do this to your sister? I looked straight at her. I did what had to be done to stop this family from drowning. Though it might be too late. Natalie opened her laptop. The recordings filled the heavy silence. We used Mom and Dad's money. Peter said just a few months we'd pay it back. Kennedy's never even home anyway. She won't notice. Think of it as helping family. Hannah's voice. Calm, assured, no hesitation. Next came Mark's voice from our cafe meeting. I need that house to stop everything from falling apart. I used your parents' money to buy foreclosures, flip them. If this unravels, I need a safe spot. That house is our lifeline. When the audio stopped, my father, the man who used to beat his chest at the dinner table, preaching about the perfect family. Leaned back like he'd been punched. We mortgaged the house. Everything, he whispered. And my son-in-law turned it into a laundering tool? Worse, Natalie said, calm and exact. We're currently reviewing documents that suggest Hannah may have knowingly facilitated the attempted transfer of ownership for Kennedy's home. There are signs of forged documents. No, that can't be true, my mother murmured. Hannah wouldn't do that, she just listens to her husband. I turned to her. That's what you always say. When she maxed out my credit card, when she borrowed my scholarship money, when she signed up for a phone line in my name. You always said she didn't mean it, she just needed help. But what about me? Did you ever believe me? She turned away. Natalie shut the laptop and handed them both documents. These forms acknowledge that you've been fully informed about your daughter and son-in-law's legal status. Hannah is in custody pending further investigation. Bail may be possible. Mark is not eligible. The evidence is too strong. My father held the paper but didn't read it. I can't believe it. Both of them? Involved in this? Not 2, I corrected. 3. Without your mortgage, they wouldn't have had the capital to run this scheme. No one forced you. You chose. Blind trust over logic. My mother looked up at me. For the first time in years, she cried, openly. We were wrong, she said through sobs. Wrong about Hannah? About Mark? About you? My father lowered his head to the table. His gray hair shook with each unsteady breath. You were always the strong one, he muttered. And we turned our backs on you, left you alone. I said nothing. I hadn't come for apologies. I came to end the cycle I had survived my whole life. Natalie stood, gave me a nod and left, leaving the house hollow, like the memories it held. What will you do? My mother asked, her voice nearly gone. About Hannah? About all of this? I rose and adjusted my bag. I'm not saving anyone from the consequences. Not even myself if it comes to that. But I won't let anyone pull me under again. I turned to leave, my hand on the doorknob. My father called after me. You're still our daughter. I didn't look back. I was. But now I'm the only one in this house, still living with the truth. I walked away. Not with victory, but with the collapse that had always been coming. 6 months after the trial ended, the first snow dusted the rooftop of the house on the hill in Lake Oswego, the house that had nearly slipped through my fingers. But I was still here. Alone? And free. Mark was sentenced to 12 years in prison on 3 counts: financial fraud, money laundering, and falsifying legal documents. Hannah, after desperately clinging to her role as a manipulated victim, finally admitted her part in forging real estate paperwork. She received a suspended sentence of 3 years, with mandatory community service and a 5-year ban from all financial dealings. On the day of sentencing, I stood outside the courtroom, not to avoid them, but because there was nothing left to say. The truth had already been recorded, signed, stamped, and filed. For good. My parents, no longer able to keep their home after their assets were frozen to repay damages, were invited by Aunt Pearl to live with her. She was blunt. They don't deserve it. But sometimes, lessons only stick if someone witnesses the aftermath. I didn't protest. I didn't interfere. Their lives were no longer my concern. This past spring, I renovated the house. Not because it was broken, but because I wanted to strip away every trace of those who once plotted to use me as a fallback plan. The living room was repainted, in a deep olive tone. The room that was once meant to be a nursery became a reading nook. A small library for my research, grant proposals, and a quiet corner to brew tea. But the biggest transformation didn't happen in bricks or paint. I joined a mentorship program for young women in medicine and science. One day, I told a senior student, No one has the right to call you selfish for standing tall instead of shrinking yourself to support others. She stared at me for a long time, then broke into tears. And I understood. I didn't need blood ties to feel the warmth of kinship. I also founded a fund called the Lily House Fund, named after the flowers I planted along my porch. It provides emergency financial support to women forced into debt by others. Every month, I read their letters. Each one was a variation of my story. Exploited by family. Silenced for the sake of peace. Called too rational simply for having boundaries. One morning, I received a postcard from my mother. Kennedy. We've lost too much to finally see you were the only one who never backed down. If you ever want to join us for dinner at Aunt Pearl's, there's always a seat for you. I placed the postcard on the kitchen shelf, next to a jar of dried lavender. I didn't tear it. Didn't reply. But I didn't throw it away either. That evening, I drove downtown to the soup kitchen where I'd been volunteering for months. They had just received an anonymous donation of $50,000, along with a note that read, "From someone who almost lost everything, for thinking they weren't worth defending." As I helped a young boy scoop noodles onto his tray, his mother whispered, "Thank you, Miss Kennedy." I nodded. "It's nothing. It's just the start of a new week." Walking out, I looked up at the Portland night sky. No more harsh city lights, just clear darkness and scattered stars. I remembered what Natalie once told me as we waited for the FBI warrant to go through. Some people never change, but you can. And I had changed. Not into someone else, but into myself. Finally, a version of me unafraid of being called selfish or different. In the dark, I started the engine. The radio played a soft symphony, steady like a breath after a long storm. I didn't need forgiveness. I just needed to keep living, this time on my own terms. Kennedy's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes, the people who hurt us the most come wrapped in the label of family. But it's only when we step out of the role of silent sacrifice, when we speak up, set boundaries, and protect what's ours, that we truly start living. In real life, many, especially women, are still trapped by toxic family expectations. Kennedy didn't just save her house, she reclaimed her voice, her freedom, and her future. What do you think of Kennedy's decision? Would you have done the same? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful, true life stories ahead.